Now that we know how to create and edit HTML pages, let's plunge into our first example. Here on screen now is a really simple bit of HTML. And here, right next to it, is what that HTML looks like once it has been rendered by your browser. As you can see, the text, which is what we see on the left, is converted by the browser into a really nice, aesthetically pleasing, formatted bit of content which we see in the browser on the right. Let's step through this HTML code line by line and understand what it is that leads to the transformation from the left to the right. All of HTML is full of tags. Tags, which you can think of as text annotations, define HTML. These are called markup. HTML stands for the hypertext markup language and basically consists of text with a lot of annotations or tags. These tags have specific meanings. The browser knows what to do with these different tags. It interprets these and renders them to screen. All of these tags that you see on screen now highlighted, HTML and title and head and body, all of these are specific tags which have a specific meaning. The browser knows what these mean, and that's how it's able to do its thing. All of these tags, along with what's enclosed between them, together constitute the HTML page. It's these tags which give structure and meaning to the page of the HTML because the browser knows how to interpret them and render something nice to screen. Let's cycle through these common tags one by one. But before we do that, let's just take a small detour. Let's try a simple thought experiment. What would happen if we omitted all tags from our HTML? Well, our HTML would then not have any markup. In other words, all that it would have is a lot of text, unannotated, non-marked up text. That's what you see on screen now. What I've done here is I've simply taken everything that lay between the tags, stripped out all of the tags, and only included the simple text. If we got rid of all of the tags, what we'd see on the browser would be this very strange representation down below. It has no structures, no line breaks, no images, nothing. And that's why it's very legitimate to say that the HTML is what lends skeleton to a web page. In the absence of the skeleton, you have no structure. And in the absence of a lack of structure, there's nothing interesting for you to look at. Note also that once we got rid of the tags, we don't have an image anymore. The browser doesn't know what to do with images unless it finds them enclosed within tags. In fact, the entire contents of the HTML page are enclosed between a pair of tags, and these are the HTML tags that you see on screen now. One note, every time you see an opening tag, like that HTML highlighted bit, it needs to have a corresponding closing tag, and the corresponding closing tag indicates that it is the closing tag by starting with a slash. Again, every HTML opening tag has a corresponding closing tag. The closing tag is represented by the slash after the angle bracket. All of the contents of the HTML page are enclosed within a pair of HTML tags. This is a way of specifying that this is in fact a well-formed HTML document. Not all browsers will require this, but it's better to have this in there just so that your code will function properly on all kinds of browsers. You should be aware that browsers actually do an excellent job of representing HTML which is not well formed. You could leave out a whole bunch of tags or make mistakes in the syntax, and browsers would still do their best and do a creditable job of rendering the HTML to screen. But even so, you should try your best to write good, well-formed HTML. This is for two reasons. First, because it's easier to maintain and understand well-formed HTML simply because it has a clear structure. And second, because browsers often have a mode which they turn on internally while dealing with badly formed HTML. In this mode, they might not render the HTML contents to screen exactly as you'd like them. Therefore, it's important to the extent possible to write good, well-formed HTML code. Next, The first thing that we see within the HTML tags is the head tag and its corresponding closing tag. The head tag contains information about the web page. This is information which is called metadata. Meta meaning that it's about itself. The metadata is what helps the browser understand what other stuff is contained in the page. The head tag, for instance, includes the title tag, which specifies what title is going to appear in the browser. Again, the head tag is metadata about the page, and the browser relies on this metadata to accurately render the page. Next up is the title tag. What's enclosed between this pair of tags is what shows up in the title at the top of the browser window. Here's what our browser output looks like, and you can see that the words "My first HTML page," which show up over there in the tab of the browser, are in fact what we've specified between the title tags. Next up, after the head tag, is the body tag. The body, the opening and closing tags, contain all of the structure and content within the web browser window. Again, the stuff that follows between the body tags corresponds to everything that you see within the browser window highlighted on the right. Everything that you see as part of the web page appears between the body tags of the HTML. Let's now drill into the body tags and understand the structure of the body a little better. The first pair of tags within the body are titled H1. Again, we have an opening and a closing H1 tag. H1 represents a heading. Here, what we've said within the H1 tags is, let's learn HTML and CSS together. There are actually different types of headings denoted by H1, H2, H3 and so on. The most prominent of these is H1, and that's what here appears right up top, the words "Let's learn HTML and CSS together." As you can see, it's noticeably larger and bolder than the rest of the contents. We also have an H3 tag. This is far less prominent. It simply says HTML is the structure and content, and you can see below that it's bold. So it's more highlighted than just ordinary text, but less highlighted than H1 tags. H2, H3, H4 and so on are all called subheader tags. In addition to header tags, we also have paragraph tabs. Paragraph tags, which are represented between the brackets P, just denote a paragraph. Each paragraph can contain one or more sentences. This content is represented less prominently than any header at all. Oh, and then there's the image tag. The image tag, which corresponds to the skeleton and its fleshed out version a little below, is one of the most important and commonly used tags in all of HTML. The image tag specifies an image resource to embed. What's the image resource? It's the name of a file. The actual image resource that has to be embedded is specified using the source attribute, src, which is actually not highlighted on screen now because we're going to talk about this in a lot of detail. Suffice it to say that this corresponds to some URL, which could either be a file on your machine or somewhere on the internet. Well, we are done with our superficial examination of this HTML. But wait, there's still some stuff here that's new and worth discussing. So let's dot those I's and cross those T's before we move on. We have already discussed well-formed HTML and how well-formed HTML requires that every opening tag should have a closing tag. Again, remember to write well-formed HTML even if your browser is able to interpret badly formed HTML. It's in your own interest to do so. Next up, when a tag has no text which has to appear between the opening and closing tags, you can combine the opening and closing tags using the notation that you see on screen now. The slash at the end of the image tag indicates that this is both an opening and a closing tag. Again, when no content needs to be specified between the tags, you can combine the opening and the closing tags. This is kind of a shortcut. The opening tag plus the content plus the closing tag together constitute an HTML element. For instance, in what's highlighted now, the opening and closing tags which are P and /P, in addition to the content, which is the text, what I have understood so far, all of these three together constitute an HTML paragraph element. This definition of an element will be important to remember throughout this class. Next up, white space. You can see that there's plenty of blanks, plenty of white spaces here on screen. Do these matter to the browser in any way? Not in the least. The browser completely ignores white space. White space in the HTML means nothing, and it's present only to help make the HTML code more readable and maintainable for you, that is the HTML programmer. In all of this, it's really important to remember and to realize that all of these tags have a hierarchical relationship. For instance, all of the highlighted tags right now live inside the body tag. When one tag is nested entirely within another, that gives rise to a hierarchical relationship. Since all of the tags in the HTML page live entirely between the pair of HTML opening and closing tags, the entire HTML document has a hierarchical relationship. This hierarchical relationship is very important. It's made use of heavily by the JavaScript, which we will get to in a bit. And one last little bit before we move on to talking about CSS. How did the browser decide on the little aesthetic elements of this page? For instance, how did it know the font size corresponding to H1 or H2 or to P, the paragraph? How did it know that the foreground should be, or the font color should be black and the background should be white? Well, these are all dictated by default styles on the browser. And if you're wondering which browser you should use, because there are so many, for the purposes of this class, any browser will work just fine. Preferably use the latest version, because browsers change a lot in how they render stuff. They also differ from each other in how they render HTML. This is something that you should keep in mind while writing and testing your HTML code.